The note trembled in Isaac Shepard's calloused hands as he stood in the empty cabin, the morning sun streaming through the window illuminating words that felt like a knife to his chest. Dear Isaac, I cannot stay here any longer. The isolation, the silence, the endless mountains, they suffocate me more each day. I know you love this life, but it is killing something inside of me. Please do not come looking for me. I am going back to civilization where I belong. Thank you for everything you tried to give me. Theresa. The paper crumpled slightly as his grip tightened, his broad shoulders tensing beneath his worn shirt. Isaac was a mountain of a man, standing well over 6 feet with muscles built from years of trapping, hunting, and surviving in the unforgiving wilderness of the Colorado Rockies. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, streaked with hints of lighter brown from the sun, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite his isolated lifestyle. At 28 years old, he had chosen this solitary existence after the war, finding peace in the silence that Theresa claimed suffocated her. But Theresa Miller had changed everything when she stumbled into his life 6 months ago. She had been part of a wagon train heading west that got separated during a late spring storm near Salida, Colorado. Isaac had found her nearly frozen, her horse lame, her supplies scattered. He brought her back to his cabin nestled high in the mountains, nursed her back to health, and somehow, impossibly, she had stayed. They had fallen into a rhythm together, and Isaac had foolishly believed she was happy. She was 23, beautiful with auburn hair that caught the firelight and green eyes that seemed to see right through his careful walls. He had fallen in love with her completely, though he had never found the right words to tell her. Now she was gone, and the cabin felt like a tomb. Isaac moved through the single room, noting what she had taken. Her saddlebags were gone, along with the spare horse he kept. She had packed practical things: dried meat, flour, coffee, blankets. She had left behind the dress he had bought her on his last trip to Salida, the one she wore when they sat by the fire in the evenings. Seeing it draped over the chair felt like she had left behind any memory of their time together. The rational part of his mind told him to respect her wishes. She was a grown woman who had made her choice. But his heart, that traitorous organ he had tried so hard to protect, refused to accept it. Not like this. Not without at least trying to understand, to see if there was anything worth fighting for. He grabbed his rifle, his hunting knife, extra ammunition, and began packing his own supplies with practiced efficiency. His gelding, a sturdy buckskin named Ranger, waited in the small corral outside. Isaac worked quickly, his movements sharp and determined. The tracks outside showed she had left sometime before dawn, maybe 4 or 5 hours ago. She was heading down the mountain toward the main trail that led to Salida. By the time the sun reached its peak, Isaac was mounted and following her trail. The signs were easy enough to read for a man with his experience. She was moving at a steady pace, not rushing, probably trying to preserve the horse's strength for the long journey. That gave him hope he could catch up to her before she reached town. The first day of riding was grueling. The mountain trails were treacherous in places, requiring careful navigation even for someone as familiar with them as Isaac. His mind raced as Ranger picked his way down rocky slopes and through dense pine forests. What would he say when he found her? How could he convince her to come back when she had made her feelings so clear in that note? Maybe he could not. Maybe this ride was foolish, the desperate action of a man who had already lost what mattered most, but he had to try. He had spent too many years alone, had finally opened himself up to someone, and he was not ready to let that go without a fight. As evening approached, he found where she had stopped to rest and water her horse at a small creek. The ashes of a small fire were still slightly warm. She was maybe 3 hours ahead of him now. He was gaining ground, but not fast enough. If she reached Salida before he caught up to her, she could board a stage or join another wagon train, and he might lose her trail entirely. Isaac pushed on through the twilight, knowing every moment counted. The moon rose full and bright, illuminating the trail enough for him to continue. Ranger was tired but willing, and Isaac made a silent promise to give the horse a full week of rest and extra oats when this was over. It was past midnight when he finally stopped, more for the horse's sake than his own. He made a cold camp, not wanting to waste time building a fire, and allowed himself only a few hours of fitful sleep. In his dreams, he saw Theresa's smile, heard her laugh when he told her stories of his trapping days, felt the warmth of her hand when it accidentally brushed his during meals. He woke before dawn, muscles stiff and protesting, but determination burning brighter than any discomfort. The trail continued downward, the air growing warmer as the altitude decreased. By mid-morning of the second day, he had reached the lower elevations where the mountains gave way to the Arkansas River Valley. Salida lay somewhere ahead, a growing town that served as a hub for miners, ranchers, and travelers moving through central Colorado. The tracks were fresher now. She had camped somewhere nearby last night, which meant he was close. Very close. Isaac's heart pounded harder with each mile. What if she refused to even talk to him? What if she had already made up her mind so completely that nothing he said would matter? He had faced grizzly bears with less fear than he felt now, because a bear was simple. A bear either attacked or it did not. But a woman's heart, especially one he had somehow failed to understand, that was infinitely more complicated. The sun was high overhead when he spotted her. She was following the main road now, about a quarter-mile ahead, her figure unmistakable even at this distance. Relief and anxiety flooded through him in equal measure. He urged Ranger into a faster pace, closing the distance between them. She must have heard the hoofbeats because she turned in her saddle, and even from a distance, he saw her body stiffen. She did not run, but she did not stop either. She kept riding, her back straight, her posture defiant. "Theresa!" His voice carried across the open space, deep and rough from disuse and emotion. She pulled her horse to a stop but did not dismount. When he reached her, reining Ranger beside her mount, he saw tears streaking down her cheeks, though her jaw was set firm. "I asked you not to follow me," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "I know." Isaac dismounted, his legs unsteady after 2 days of hard riding. "I read your note multiple times, and I could not just let you go, not like that." "There is nothing to say, Isaac. I do not belong in those mountains. I tried. I truly did. But I wake up every morning feeling like the trees are closing in on me, like the silence is going to swallow me whole. I need people, conversation, life happening around me. You need solitude and wilderness. We want different things." He took a step closer, looking up at her. "That is not entirely true. I want you, Theresa. I want you more than I have wanted anything in 10 years. She closed her eyes, more tears spilling over. "Wanting me is not enough. You cannot change who you are, and I would never ask you to. You belong in those mountains, but I do not. I have been slowly disappearing up there, becoming smaller and quieter until I barely recognize myself. If I stay, I will grow to resent you, and I do not want that. I do not want to watch what I feel for you turn bitter. What you feel for me." Isaac's heart seized on those words. "Theresa, look at me, please." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. The connection between them was still there, powerful and undeniable, crackling in the air like summer lightning. "You love me?" he asked quietly. "Because I love you. I have loved you for months, and I was too scared to say it. I thought showing you through actions would be enough, keeping you safe, providing for you, trying to make the cabin comfortable. but I should have used words. I should have told you every single day how you changed everything for me. Isaac. Her voice was barely a whisper. Loving each other does not solve the problem. Love does not change the fact that your life makes me miserable. Then we will change the life. The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once said, he realized he meant them completely. We will find a different way. I am not saying I know exactly what that looks like right now, but there has to be a compromise between my mountain and your civilization. She shook her head, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. You would go crazy living in town. You have said 100 times how much you hate crowds, how the noise makes your skin crawl, how you left all that behind for good reasons. I left because I needed to heal after the war, because I could not stand the memories that came with being around other soldiers. But that was years ago. Maybe I have been hiding instead of healing. Maybe meeting you was supposed to show me that. He reached up, resting his hand on her knee. Even through the fabric of her riding skirt, he felt the warmth of her. Theresa, I rode 2 days to find you. I will ride another 200 if that is what it takes. I will live in the middle of Salada if that makes you happy. The mountains will always be there. But you are here now, and I am not fool enough to let you slip away because I am too stubborn to adapt. You do not mean that. In a month, you would be miserable. You would pace like a caged wolf, and I would have to watch you suffer, knowing I was the cause. Or maybe I would discover I can be happy anywhere as long as you are beside me. Maybe that is what love means, not finding someone who fits perfectly into your existing life, but being willing to build a new life together. Theresa dismounted, her legs apparently as unsteady as his had been. She stood close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, see the faint freckles across her nose that the mountain sun had coaxed out. She was tired from her own journey, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she had slept as poorly as he had. What are you really proposing? She asked. Because I need specifics, Isaac. I cannot make decisions based on pretty words and hopeful maybes. He took a deep breath, his mind racing to form a concrete plan. We go to Salada together. We find a place to stay while we figure things out. I have money saved more than you might think. Years of trapping and no expenses add up. We look for a property, maybe something on the outskirts of town. Somewhere with enough land that I do not feel suffocated, but close enough to people that you have the society you need. I can work as a guide for hunting parties or hire on at one of the ranches. Hell, I can learn to do carpentry or blacksmithing if that is what it takes. I am strong and capable. Someone will hire me. You have thought about this before, she said slowly, searching his face, not consciously. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I must have known the cabin was not enough for you. I just did not want to admit it because I was terrified of what that might mean. Terrified that you would leave, which you did, or that I would lose myself trying to be someone I am not. And now I am more terrified of living without you than I am of anything else. The mountains are beautiful, Theresa, but they are cold and empty without you in them. You brought warmth and light and laughter into my life. You made me remember what it feels like to be human instead of just existing. I was not living up there, I was hiding. You know the difference, do you not? You understand it better than anyone because you have been doing the same thing in reverse. She flinched slightly. What do you mean? You have been hiding too. Maybe not from the same things I was hiding from, but hiding nonetheless. You told me once that you joined that wagon train to escape a marriage your parents were pushing you toward. A safe, respectable match with a man you did not love. You ran from that life, but then you got lost in the mountains with me, and maybe you just traded one form of hiding for another. Theresa's eyes widened. That is not fair. Is it not true? She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Several long moments passed. A hawk cried overhead, circling in the bright Colorado sky. The river rushed somewhere nearby, the sound a constant backdrop to their conversation. "Maybe you are partially right," she finally admitted. "I did run from that life. And yes, part of me was hiding in your cabin, avoiding having to make real decisions about my future. But Isaac, the difference is I have made a decision now. I am going back to civilization, but on my own terms. I am going to find work, support myself, make my own choices. I am not running anymore, I am moving forward. Then move forward with me. Not behind me, not following my lead, but beside me as an equal partner. We build something new together, something that belongs to both of us." The tears were flowing freely down her face now, and Isaac felt his own eyes burning. He was not a man who cried easily, but the thought of losing her was breaking something fundamental inside him. "I am so scared," she whispered. "Scared that it will not work, that we will end up resenting each other, that love is not enough to bridge the gap between who we are. I am scared too, terrified actually, but I am willing to try. Are you?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw so many emotions flickering across her face: fear, hope, love, uncertainty. Then slowly she nodded. "Yes, God help me, yes. But we do this properly, Isaac. We take our time. We find a place that works for both of us. We do not rush into anything just because emotions are running high. And if it does not work, if we try and it becomes clear we are making each other miserable, we have to be honest enough to admit it and walk away with dignity." Relief crashed over him so powerfully, his knees nearly buckled. He reached for her, pulling her into his arms, and she came willingly, her face pressing against his chest. He held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, because to him she was. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "Thank you for giving us a chance." They stood like that for several minutes, just holding each other on the side of the road. Eventually, practical concerns reasserted themselves. They needed to continue to Salida, find lodging, and begin the process of figuring out their future. The ride into town together felt entirely different than Isaac's desperate chase. Theresa rode beside him, close enough that their legs occasionally brushed. They talked as they traveled, really talked in a way they had not done enough of in the cabin. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her mother's obsession with social status and her father's quiet disappointment that she was not the biddable daughter they wanted. She talked about her dreams of independence, of maybe opening a bakery someday because she loved baking but had never had the chance to do it for money. Isaac shared more about his war experiences than he ever had before. He described the friends he lost, the things he saw that haunted him, the way coming to the mountains had felt like the only way to escape the ghosts. But he also talked about how the isolation had become its own kind of prison over time, how he had convinced himself he preferred being alone when maybe he was just afraid of being hurt again. "People leave," he said quietly as they crossed a shallow ford. "People die. It is easier to not care in the first place than to risk the pain. But also lonelier," Theresa added, "and sadder. Living without risk means living without joy too. When did you become so wise?" "Somewhere between freezing to death in a snowstorm and falling in love with a stubborn mountain man." She said it lightly, but the words made his heart soar. "Say that again," he requested. "Which part? The stubborn part, the falling in love part?" She smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her since catching up. "I love you, Isaac Shepard. I tried not to. I told myself it was just gratitude or loneliness or convenience. But it is none of those things. It is love, inconvenient and complicated as it may be. I love you too, Theresa Miller, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." They reached Salida by late afternoon. The town had grown considerably in the 2 years since Isaac last visited. The arrival of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad had transformed it from a simple settlement into a bustling hub. The main street was lined with businesses, a mercantile, several saloons, a hotel, a telegraph office, a bank, and various other establishments. People moved along the wooden sidewalks, going about their business. The noise and activity that once would have made Isaac immediately tense now felt different with Theresa beside him. They secured rooms at the hotel, separate rooms, properly, though the knowing look the clerk gave them suggested he assumed otherwise. Isaac did not care. His reputation was not something he had ever worried much about, and Theresa was her own woman, capable of making her own choices about propriety. After settling the horses at the livery stable with instructions for extra care and feed, they met in the hotel dining room for supper. It felt oddly formal after months of sharing simple meals at a rough-hewn table in the cabin, but there was also something nice about it. Theresa had changed into the dress she packed, a simple blue cotton that complemented her coloring, and Isaac had done his best to brush the trail dust off his clothes. He was still very much a mountain man in appearance, his weathered face and long hair marking him as different from the businessmen and railroad workers in the room. But Theresa looked at him like he was the only man present. Over steak and potatoes, they made plans. Tomorrow they would visit the land office to see what properties were available. Isaac had nearly $3,000 saved, an enormous sum that reflected years of frugal living and successful trapping seasons. It was more than enough to buy land and build a modest house. Theresa wanted to explore the town, see what opportunities might exist for employment or business ventures. "I will not be dependent on you financially," she said firmly. "I need to contribute to feel like I am building something of my own as well as something with you. I understand. And I respect that. Just promise me you will let me help when you need it. Partnership goes both ways." Agreed. They parted ways at their respective room doors with a chaste kiss that nonetheless left Isaac's pulse racing. Sleep came easier that night than it had in the mountains without her, though his bed felt too soft, and the sounds of the town outside his window were strange and jarring. The next week passed in a flurry of activity. The land office had several properties available. Some were too far from town for Theresa's comfort, others too close to the busy railroad yard for Isaac's preference. They finally found a compromise 20 acres about 3 miles south of Salida, bordering the Arkansas River. There was a small existing cabin on the property, nothing fancy but livable, with room to expand when they were ready. The land had a mix of open meadow and pine forest, with stunning views of the mountains Isaac loved. But it was close enough to town that Theresa could ride in easily, close enough to hear the train whistle in the distance, a reminder that civilization was nearby. Isaac paid cash for the property, the transaction making it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. He now owned land not as a solitary hermit, but as a man building a future with someone he loved. Theresa, meanwhile, had been exploring business opportunities. She discovered that Salida, despite its growth, had no proper bakery. People bought bread and simple goods from the general store, but nothing fancy or specialized. The idea she had mentioned on the trail began to take concrete shape. She talked to the banker about small business loans, researched costs for ovens and supplies, and even began testing recipes in the hotel kitchen, with the amused permission of the cook. "The thing is," she explained to Isaac one evening as they walked along the river, "I need to prove myself first. I cannot just open a shop and hope people come. I need to build a reputation, let people taste my goods and want more. So I am thinking I start small, sell baked goods at the Saturday market for a few months, build up a customer base, save money. Then when I am established, I invest in a proper storefront. That is smart, patient, and practical. I learned from watching you, you do not rush into anything, you plan and prepare. I rushed into chasing you down, he pointed out. That was different. That was your heart overruling your head, and I am grateful it did. They had been in Salida for 2 weeks when they moved to their new property. It was a sunny day in late July, the year 1881 marking itself with warm summer weather. Isaac hired a wagon to transport the supplies they had purchased: furniture, kitchen goods, tools, seeds for a late vegetable garden. Theresa had also bought fabric and sewing supplies, planning to make curtains and cushions to transform the bare cabin into a home. The existing cabin was rough but sound, built by someone who knew what they were doing even if they lacked finesse. It had 2 rooms, a main living area with a fireplace, and a smaller bedroom. The roof was solid, the walls well chinked against weather. It was smaller than Isaac's mountain cabin, but felt larger because of the windows that let in abundant light and views of the property. They spent the first few days cleaning and organizing, working side by side with an ease that felt natural. Isaac repaired the porch, built proper steps, and started planning an addition that would give them more space. Theresa attacked the interior with determination, scrubbing years of bachelor neglect away and slowly adding touches that made it feel like a home rather than just a shelter. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, often in comfortable silence, sometimes talking about their days or their plans or their pasts. Isaac had never felt so content. The proximity to town had not bothered him as much as he feared. In fact, knowing it was there if he needed it somehow made it less oppressive. And seeing Theresa flourish, watching the light return to her eyes and the energy to her movements, was worth any discomfort. A month after moving to the property, Theresa had her first success at the Saturday market. She brought pies, cookies, and fresh bread and sold out within 2 hours. The money she earned was modest but significant in its meaning, proof that her dream was viable, that people valued her skills. "I need to bake more," she said excitedly when she returned home. "Twice as much for next week. Maybe some cakes too." "Isaac, people were asking if I do special orders for birthdays and weddings." Her enthusiasm was infectious. Isaac found himself building her a proper outdoor oven, using techniques he learned from a Mexican laborer he met in town. It took him 2 weeks of hard work, but when it was finished, Theresa could bake more in one day than she ever could with the fireplace or the cabin's small stove. As summer turned to autumn, their life together found its rhythm. Isaac took work as a hunting guide for wealthy tourists from the East, using his mountain skills to provide an experience they craved while earning good money. He also helped local ranchers with predator problems, tracking and dealing with wolves or mountain lions that threatened livestock. The work kept him outdoors doing what he knew best, but he came home every night to Theresa. Theresa's baking business grew steadily. By October, she had enough regular customers that she was baking 5 days a week and selling at 2 different markets. She had also secured contracts to provide bread for the hotel and 2 of the larger saloons. The money she earned went into a separate account at the bank, her nest egg for the eventual storefront. One evening in late October, as the first snows dusted the high peaks visible from their porch, Isaac turned to Theresa with sudden nervousness twisting his gut. "I have been thinking about something," he began. "Well, worrying about it, more accurately." She set down the mending she was working on and gave him her full attention. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. That is part of the problem. Everything feels almost perfect and I keep waiting for it to fall apart. But that is not what I wanted to talk about." He took a breath. We have been living together for months now, here and before in the mountain cabin. And while I do not give a damn what people think, I worry about your reputation. People talk, and I do not want that talk to hurt your business or make you uncomfortable. People have been talking since we arrived, Isaac, but I have not lost business over it. If anything, the mystery makes me more interesting. She smiled slightly. Though I appreciate your concern for my reputation. That is not really what I am trying to say. I am making a mess of this. He stood up, suddenly too restless to sit. What I mean is, I want to marry you. I should probably do this properly, maybe with flowers and a ring and some romantic speech, but I am not good at that sort of thing. What I am good at is knowing what I want and going after it. And I want you, Theresa. I want you as my wife, legally and officially. I want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours. Theresa had gone very still, her eyes wide. Are you proposing to me? Apparently very badly. But yes, will you marry me? She stood up, crossing to where he stood by the porch railing. Yes. Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Though you are right, that was a terrible proposal. If you tell this story to our grandchildren someday, you had better embellish it considerably. Relief and joy exploded through him. He picked her up, spinning her around despite her surprised laughter. When he set her down, he kissed her properly for the first time, really kissed her, not the careful, restrained kisses they had shared before. She responded with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I do not have a ring yet. We can go to town tomorrow and pick something out. I do not need anything fancy. A simple band is perfect. You deserve fancy. You deserve everything. But I will settle for giving you whatever you will accept. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Salida. Isaac wore new clothes purchased specially for the occasion, though he refused to cut his hair despite the preacher's subtle suggestions. Theresa wore a dress she sewed herself, cream-colored with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. They had invited no one, having few connections in town, so the witnesses were borrowed from the street, a curious shopkeeper and his wife who happened to be passing by. The ceremony was brief and simple. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Isaac kissed his bride with every ounce of love he possessed. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, an extravagance that felt appropriate for the occasion, and returned to their property the next day as husband and wife. Winter came properly then, snow falling steadily through November and December. The cabin stayed warm thanks to the solid construction and large fireplace. Isaac spent the short days working on projects around the property, building better fencing, repairing the barn, stockpiling firewood. Theresa baked when the weather allowed her to get to town, but the winter months were slower, giving her time to rest and plan for the spring. They grew closer in the forced intimacy of winter, learning each other's habits and rhythms, negotiating the small compromises that make a marriage work. Isaac learned to be neater, to think about how his muddy boots or scattered tools affected shared space. Theresa learned to accept that sometimes Isaac needed silence, needed to be alone with his thoughts without it being a rejection of her company. They talked about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their fears, their dreams. Theresa shared that she had a sister back in St. Louis she had not spoken to in over a year, and she missed her despite their differences. Isaac encouraged her to write, to try rebuilding that bridge. He talked about the men he served with during the war, how he sometimes felt guilty for surviving when they did not, how building this life with her was helping him forgive himself for living. By the time spring arrived in 1882, they had weathered their first full season together and emerged stronger. The snow melted, revealing the promise of new growth. Theresa was eager to restart her baking business in earnest, and Isaac began planning a large vegetable garden that would provide fresh produce all summer and food to preserve for the next winter. In April, Theresa made an announcement that changed everything again. "I am with child," she said one morning at breakfast, her voice a mixture of joy and nervousness. Isaac froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, Isaac, I am fairly sure I am pregnant." He set the cup down carefully, his hands trembling slightly. A child. They were going to have a child. The idea filled him with wonder and terror in equal measure. "How do you feel about it?" he asked carefully, scared, excited, both at once. "How do you feel?" He stood and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair so he could look directly into her eyes. "I feel like the luckiest man alive, and terrified I will fail as a father, and determined to be the best husband and father I can possibly be." She touched his face, her palm warm against his bearded cheek. "We will figure it out together, just like everything else." The pregnancy progressed through the summer months. Theresa continued baking as long as she could, though Isaac worried constantly about her overdoing it. She was healthy and strong, though, and refused to be treated like an invalid. By August, however, she had to admit she needed to slow down. She trained a young woman from town, Margaret Sanders, to help with the baking, paying her a portion of the profits and teaching her the recipes and techniques. Isaac hovered and fussed in ways that Theresa found alternately endearing and annoying. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving intricate designs into the wood. He made sure they had everything they would need: blankets, tiny clothes, supplies. He arranged for the doctor from Salida to be on call when the time came. In late September, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Theresa went into labor. Isaac rode frantically to town to fetch the doctor and a midwife, then paced outside the bedroom door for hours while they worked. He had faced down bears and mountain lions without flinching, but listening to Theresa's pain and being unable to help nearly unmade him. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard the sharp cry of a newborn. The midwife emerged, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Shepard, a healthy baby boy. And your wife is doing well." Isaac barely heard the rest of what she said. He rushed into the bedroom to find Theresa exhausted but beaming, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such love and pride that he felt his eyes burning with tears. "Meet your son," she said softly. Isaac approached almost reverently, looking down at the small red face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Can I hold him?" Isaac asked. Theresa carefully transferred the baby to his arms. Isaac had held many things in his life: weapons, tools, animals, but nothing had ever felt as precious or as terrifying as the tiny human he now cradled. The baby opened his eyes briefly, unfocused but seemingly looking right at his father, and Isaac felt something fundamental shift inside him. Whatever came before, whatever he had been or done, nothing mattered as much as protecting and loving this child and his mother. "What should we name him?" Theresa asked. They had discussed names but never settled on anything definitively. Now, looking at his son, Isaac knew. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Shepard, after your father." Theresa's eyes filled with tears. Her relationship with her father had been complicated, but Isaac knew she loved him despite their differences. Naming their son after him was a bridge, an olive branch. "Thomas," she repeated. "I like it. Thomas Isaac Shepard. You want to give him my name too, of course. He should have both our families in his name. Thomas for my father, Isaac for you." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in ways Isaac never anticipated. Thomas was a good baby, relatively calm, but still required constant care. Theresa recovered well from the birth and was soon back to baking, though on a reduced schedule. Margaret continued to help, becoming almost like a younger sister to Theresa. Isaac found himself enchanted by fatherhood. He would spend hours just watching Thomas sleep, marveling at the tiny perfection of him. As the baby grew and became more alert, Isaac talked to him constantly, telling him about the mountains and the animals, about his mother's strength and kindness, about the world he would grow up in. Winter came again, their second on the property. With a baby in the house, the season felt different, more precious somehow. The cozy evenings by the fire now including Thomas's gurgles and coos. Theresa would bake while Isaac entertained their son, and they would share the day's stories and plan for the future. "I think I am ready," Theresa said one evening in February. "Ready to open a real bakery in town." "You are sure? It is a big step. I have been saving for over a year. I have a solid customer base, and with Margaret trained to help, I can manage the workload even with Thomas. There is a space available on Main Street, not too large but perfect for starting out. I already spoke to the landlord about the rent." Isaac smiled. "Then you should do it. You have worked hard for this." She reached across and took his hand. "I could not have done any of this without you. You know that, right? You gave me the space to dream and the support to make those dreams real. You did the work. I just tried not to get in your way. You did more than that. You believed in me when I barely believed in myself." Theresa's bakery opened in March 1883 to considerable fanfare. Half the town seemed to turn out for the opening day, curious about the venture and eager to support one of their own. Theresa had spent weeks preparing, baking a variety of goods to showcase her skills. By noon, she was nearly sold out, and by the end of the day, she had a list of custom orders that would keep her busy for weeks. Isaac helped manage the shop when he could, though his natural reticence with strangers made him better suited to the physical work, delivering large orders, hauling supplies, maintaining the ovens. Thomas spent his days in a playpen behind the counter, entertaining customers with his babbles and smiles. Life had found a comfortable pattern. Isaac still guided hunting trips in the fall, still helped ranchers with predator problems, still spent time in the mountains he loved. But he always came home to Theresa and Thomas, to the life they had built together. The compromise they forged between his need for wilderness and her need for community worked because they both valued the relationship more than their individual preferences. As months turned into years, their little family grew and thrived. Thomas became a sturdy toddler, curious and adventurous, already showing signs he had inherited his father's love of the outdoors and his mother's stubborn independence. The bakery flourished, becoming a cornerstone of the Salida community. Isaac's reputation as a guide and tracker brought steady work and good income. In 1885, Theresa became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy felt easier despite the added challenge of chasing after an energetic 3-year-old. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Rose Shepard, arrived in early spring. She had Theresa's auburn hair and green eyes, and Isaac was lost from the first moment he held her. "Now I have to worry about boys coming around," he joked, though there was real concern beneath the humor. "That is many years away," Theresa assured him. "And when the time comes, you will have to trust that we raised her to make good choices." "I trust her. It is the boys I do not trust," Theresa laughed. "You were a boy once." "Exactly. That is how I know what they are thinking." Life continued its forward march. Thomas started school in Salida, making friends and learning his letters and numbers. Emma grew from a baby into a bright, willful toddler who wrapped her father around her tiny finger. The bakery expanded, taking over the adjacent storefront and employing 3 people besides Theresa and Margaret. Isaac added a proper addition to their cabin, giving them more bedrooms and a larger living area. He also built a workshop where he could craft furniture and do repairs during the winter months when guide work was slow. Some of his pieces were good enough that Theresa convinced him to sell them, and he discovered he enjoyed the creative outlet. In the summer of 1888, Theresa's sister Catherine came to visit from St. Louis with her husband and 2 children. The reunion was emotional, years of separation falling away in tears and embraces. Catherine was amazed at the life Theresa had built, at the confident, successful woman her sister had become. She had always known Theresa as the rebellious daughter fighting against expectations, not as the businesswoman and mother she now was. "You seem truly happy," Catherine said one afternoon while they watched the children play in the yard. "I worried when you ran away, worried you were making a terrible mistake, but I was wrong. This life suits you." "I am happy," Theresa confirmed. "Happier than I ever thought possible. It has not been easy building the business, balancing everything, learning to be a wife and mother. But it has been worth it. And Isaac, he is nothing like the man mother and father wanted you to marry. Thank God for that. Can you imagine me married to Arthur Whitmore, hosting tea parties and pretending to care about social gossip? I would have withered and died. Arthur married someone else, you know. She seems perfectly content with that life. Then she is better suited to it than I ever was. Everyone needs to find where they belong. I belong here with Isaac and our children and this life we built." Catherine's visit lasted 2 weeks, and when she left, it was with promises to stay in better contact and plans for Theresa to visit St. Louis eventually. The reconciliation with her sister felt like a final piece falling into place, healing an old wound Theresa had learned to live with, but never fully accepted. The years flowed on, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. In 1890, Theresa gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named James. He was a happy, easy baby who seemed content to observe the world with wide, curious eyes. Thomas was now 8, already showing signs of the man he would become, strong like his father, creative like his mother. Emma was 5. Enrolled in school and already making her presence known with her quick mind and quicker tongue. Isaac sometimes stood outside in the evenings, looking at the cabin, now more of a proper house after multiple expansions, and marveling at how his life had changed. 10 years ago, he was alone in a mountain cabin, convinced he preferred solitude. Now his home was full of noise and life and love, and he could not imagine going back to that isolation. Theresa would find him during these moments, slipping her hand into his in comfortable familiarity. "Thinking deep thoughts," she would ask, "just appreciating what we have, how close I came to losing it before it even began. But you did not lose it. You rode 2 days to find me and bring me back home, and I am forever grateful you did. Are you happy, truly happy?" "Isaac, you ask me that at least once a month, and my answer never changes. Yes, I am happy. This life, this family, this imperfect but beautiful compromise we made, it is everything I needed even when I did not know enough to ask for it." As their children grew older, both Isaac and Theresa made sure to tell them the story of how they met and fell in love. They did not hide the difficulties or pretend it was simple. They wanted their children to understand that love required work and compromise and the willingness to adapt. They wanted them to know that their mother once ran away and their father chased after her, and that the 2 days he spent tracking her down changed the course of all their lives. Thomas, especially, loved the story. "Tell me again how you found her note," he would beg, and Isaac would recount the morning he discovered Theresa gone, the fear and determination that drove him down the mountain. "Your mother could have sent me away," Isaac always said. "She would have been within her rights. But she gave me a chance. She gave us a chance, and that chance became everything." In 1895, Theresa made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She sold the bakery. After 12 years of building and running the business, she was ready for a change. Margaret, who had been her right hand from the beginning, purchased it with a loan that Theresa co-signed. It was the right decision. Margaret had earned it, and Theresa was ready to step back. "I want to focus on other things," she explained to Isaac. "The children need me more now. Thomas is 13 and entering that difficult age. Emma is 10 and starting to ask questions about becoming a woman that I should be present to answer. James is 5 and about to start school. And you and I have been so busy building and working that we have not taken time to just be together." "What do you want to do instead?" Isaac asked. "I want to write. I have been keeping journals for years, but I want to try writing stories, maybe articles for magazines. I want to take up painting. I have always been interested but never had time. I want to be more involved in the community. And I want to travel with you sometimes when you go into the mountains. Show me that world you love so much, now that I am older and wiser and can appreciate it properly." Isaac was touched by her request. He had largely given up his extended mountain trips after they married, not wanting to be away from his family. But the idea of sharing that part of himself with Theresa, of taking her into his old territory as partners rather than as rescuer and rescued, appealed enormously. That summer, they left the children with Catherine, who had agreed to visit for a month, and Isaac took Theresa on a 3-week trip into the high country. They traveled to his old cabin, which still stood though it was deteriorating from neglect and weather. Theresa saw the place where he had lived alone for so many years, understood better the isolation she had experienced and run from. "I see why you loved it," she said, standing outside the cabin looking at the stunning mountain vistas. "It is breathtaking, but I also understand why I could not stay. Beauty alone is not enough to sustain a person, at least not enough to sustain me. You are different. You found peace here. I found escape here. Peace came later when I learned to stop hiding from life. You taught me that." They camped under the stars, fished in crystal-clear streams, hiked trails that Isaac had walked 1,000 times alone but now saw fresh through Theresa's eyes. She was not a natural outdoorswoman. She complained about mosquitoes and sleeping on the ground, and the lack of a proper bath. But she was game and determined and laughed at her own discomforts. By the end of the 3 weeks, she had a deeper appreciation for the wilderness and a firm conviction that she preferred civilization. "I am glad I came," she said as they rode back toward Salida. "I needed to understand this part of you better. But I am also very much looking forward to my own bed and a hot bath." Understood and appreciated. I know this was not easy for you. Marriage is not about always doing easy things. It is about doing hard things together and coming out stronger on the other side. As the 1890s progressed, Isaac and Theresa settled into the rhythms of middle age. Their children continued growing. Thomas became a young man, tall and broad like his father, deciding he wanted to study engineering and eventually work on the railroads that were transforming the West. Emma developed into a sharp-minded young woman interested in medicine, an ambition that both parents supported despite the challenges women faced in that field. James showed early talent with horses and talked constantly about becoming a rancher. Isaac had gray threading through his dark hair now, and his face showed the lines of a life well lived. But he was still strong, still capable, still the mountain man at his core, even as he had adapted to a more settled life. Theresa's auburn hair had strands of silver, and she wore reading glasses for close work, but she remained beautiful in Isaac's eyes. In 1898, they celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. Isaac arranged to surprise a trip to Denver, the biggest city in Colorado, something Theresa had mentioned wanting to see but they had never made time for. They left the children, now 14, 13, and 8, in the care of neighbors and took the train north. Denver overwhelmed Isaac immediately. The noise, the crowds, the endless buildings, it assaulted his senses in ways that made him tense and uncomfortable. But Theresa came alive in the city, delighting in the shops, the restaurants, the theater they attended. Watching her enjoy herself made his own discomfort worthwhile. On their last evening in Denver, they had dinner at a fancy restaurant, the kind of place Isaac would never choose, but Theresa had always wanted to try. Over expensive wine and food he could not pronounce, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you for this. I know cities make you uncomfortable. You are worth a little discomfort, more than a little actually." I was thinking about that morning I left, back in 1881. I was so convinced I was doing the right thing that we wanted incompatible lives. I wrote that note telling you not to follow me, and I meant it. I thought I was being mature and realistic, but I followed you anyway. Thank God you did. Thank God you refused to give up without trying. If you had respected my wishes and let me go, I would have ended up somewhere eventually, probably would have made a life for myself. But it would not have been this life. I would not have our children, our history, our partnership. I would have survived, but I would not have thrived. I would have survived too, probably. I would have gone back to my mountain and convinced myself I was fine alone, but I would have been lying to myself. You saved me as much as I saved you that day on the trail. We saved each other, Theresa corrected. That is what love does. It rescues us from the smaller lives we would have settled for. They returned to Salida with renewed appreciation for each other and for the life they had built. The new century approached, bringing changes and challenges they could not foresee. But they faced the future together, confident in the foundation they had spent nearly 2 decades constructing. In 1899, Thomas left for college in Golden, Colorado, the first of their children to leave home. It was harder than Isaac expected, saying goodbye to his oldest son. But Thomas was excited and ready, and Isaac was proud of the young man he had become. Emma, at 14, was increasingly focused on her studies and helping the local doctor when he would allow it. She had already decided she would pursue medicine regardless of the obstacles, and both parents believed she would succeed through sheer determination. James, at 9, was the wild one, always getting into scrapes, coming home dirty and happy, reminding Isaac powerfully of himself at that age. He was the child who most loved when Isaac took him into the backcountry, who soaked up every skill and lesson about tracking, hunting, and surviving in the wilderness. "That one is going to give us gray hair," Theresa said after James came home with a scraped knee and a tall tale about wrestling a coyote. "That one is going to be fine," Isaac assured her. "He has good instincts. He just needs to learn when to trust them and when to use caution." Sounds like someone else I know. Are you implying I am not always cautious and sensible? I am saying you once tracked a woman through the mountains for 2 days based purely on instinct and emotion, with no guarantee of success. Cautious and sensible would have stayed home and accepted she was gone. Best impulsive decision I ever made. As the calendar turned to 1900, Isaac and Theresa found themselves parents of adult or near-adult children, established members of their community, and more in love than ever. The passion of their early relationship had evolved into something deeper and more stable, a love built on shared history, mutual respect, and the knowledge that they had chosen each other every day for nearly 2 decades. They still disagreed sometimes. Theresa still occasionally felt the pull toward more excitement or society than their life provided. Isaac still sometimes retreated into himself, needing solitude that she had to learn not to take personally. But they had learned how to navigate these moments, how to give each other space while maintaining connection. In the spring of 1901, Theresa received a letter that her father had passed away. Despite the years and distance, the news hit her hard. Isaac immediately arranged for them to travel to St. Louis, bringing all 3 children for the funeral and to spend time with her mother and sister. The trip was bittersweet. Theresa's mother was older, frailer, but she welcomed her daughter warmly. The disapproval and disappointment that had colored their relationship when Theresa was younger had softened with time. Seeing her grandchildren, hearing about Theresa's successes, seemed to give the older woman pride she had not been capable of expressing before. "I did not understand," Theresa's mother said quietly during one of their conversations. "When you ran away, when you wrote saying you were not coming back, I thought you were throwing your life away. I thought you would end up desperate and alone, that you would regret your choices. But you were right and I was wrong. You knew what you needed and you were brave enough to pursue it. I wish I had supported you instead of fighting you. Thank you for saying that, Mother. It means more than you might realize." Isaac stayed mostly in the background during the visit, supporting Theresa, but recognizing this was her time to reconnect with her family. But on their last evening before returning to Colorado, Theresa's mother pulled him aside. "Thank you for making my daughter happy. I know I did not approve initially. I wanted her to marry someone of our class, someone conventional. But you gave her something more important than status or money. You gave her freedom to become who she was meant to be, and you loved her enough to change your own life to accommodate her dreams. That is rarer and more valuable than anything I thought she needed. She did the same for me, madam. I thought I wanted isolation, but what I really needed was someone who would challenge me to grow. Theresa saved me from a half-life I did not even recognize as such until she showed me what I was missing." They returned to Colorado with a sense of closure, family wounds healed as much as they could be. Thomas came home from college for the summer, working with his father to build an additional structure on their property, a proper workshop that was separate from the house. Emma, now 16, had secured a position as an unofficial apprentice to Dr. Harrison in Salida, learning everything he would teach her while she planned for the formal education she would eventually need. James, at 11, was a bundle of energy who spent his days exploring every inch of their property and beyond. The years continued their march. In 1903, at the age of 50, Isaac suffered a serious accident while guiding a hunting party. A spooked horse threw him hard, and he broke several ribs and his collarbone. The injury was not life-threatening, but it was serious enough to lay him up for weeks and leave him unable to do heavy physical work for months. The forced inactivity chafed at him terribly. He was used to being strong, capable, the protector and provider. Needing help with basic tasks frustrated him to the point of anger. Theresa handled it with characteristic patience and firmness. "You will heal. It will take time, but you will heal. And in the meantime, you will let people help you without being a stubborn ass about it. You have spent 20 years taking care of everyone else. Let us take care of you for a little while." The experience taught Isaac humility and gave him a deeper appreciation for the vulnerability Theresa had felt during her pregnancies and recoveries. He healed eventually, though he was never quite as strong as he had been before. At 49, his body was starting to remind him he was not invincible. In 1905, Thomas graduated from college with his engineering degree and secured a position with the railroad. He moved to California, pursuing opportunities in the rapidly growing Western rail network. His departure left a hole in the family, but they were proud of his success and maintained regular correspondence. Emma, at 20, was finally ready to pursue her medical education. She left for a women's medical college in the East, determined to become a doctor despite all the barriers and prejudices she would face. Isaac worried terribly about her being so far away, but he also knew she had the strength and intelligence to succeed. James, at 15, had grown into a young man who was pure cowboy at heart. He worked at a neighboring ranch whenever they would hire him, learning the cattle business from the ground up. He talked about eventually buying his own spread, running his own operation. "We did well with them," Theresa said one evening after James left for yet another week working cattle on the high summer pastures. "All three of them know who they are and what they want. They are confident and capable. We should be proud." "I am proud. Also sad that they are all grown and leaving. Also worried about all the things that could go wrong. Also grateful they are healthy and happy. I contain multitudes of parental emotions." Theresa laughed. "Welcome to watching your children become adults. It is terrifying and wonderful all at once." As they entered their later years, Isaac and Theresa found unexpected joys in their life together. They had time now that the children were grown, time to travel, to pursue hobbies, to simply enjoy each other's company. They took long rides through the mountains in good weather. They read books aloud to each other in the evenings. They hosted dinners for friends and neighbors, their home a gathering place for the community. Theresa wrote stories and articles, several of which were published in regional magazines. She took up painting with watercolors, discovering she had some talent for capturing the landscape around their home. Isaac built furniture in his workshop, pieces that became sought after locally for their quality and craftsmanship. In 1908, Thomas got married to a woman he met in California, a lovely young woman named Patricia. Isaac and Theresa made the long trip west for the wedding, delighting in seeing their oldest son so happy and settled. The following year, Thomas and Patricia announced they were expecting their first child, making Isaac and Theresa grandparents for the first time. Emma completed her medical degree in 1910, one of the few women in her graduating class. She returned to Colorado, not to Salida but to Denver, where she opened a practice focused on women's and children's health. She had to fight for every patient, every ounce of respect, but she persevered with the same determination that had gotten her through medical school. James, at 20, proposed to a rancher's daughter named Sarah, whom he had known since childhood. They married in a simple ceremony at the Salida Church in 1911, and James began working seriously towards saving money to buy his own land and cattle. Isaac, now approaching 60, had slowed down considerably. His hair was fully gray, his face weathered, his body bearing the marks of a life lived physically. But his mind was sharp and his heart was full. He had survived a war, years of isolation, and decades of building a life with the woman he loved. Theresa, at 55, was still beautiful in his eyes. Her hair was silver now, her hands showing the signs of years of work, but her spirit was undiminished. She remained actively involved in community affairs, was known and respected throughout Salida, and maintained close relationships with all three children despite the distances separating them. In the summer of 1912, all three children came home at the same time for the first time in years. Thomas and Patricia brought their 2-year-old son Benjamin and announced Patricia was pregnant with their second child. Emma came with stories of her growing practice and the challenges she faced, but also the successes she was achieving. James and Sarah brought news that they had finalized the purchase of 200 acres north of Salida and would be starting their own ranch. The week the family spent together was precious. Isaac looked around the dinner table, at his children now grown with lives of their own, at his daughter-in-law and son-in-law, at his grandson, and felt overwhelming gratitude. This life, this family, this legacy, none of it would exist if Theresa had not left that note 31 years ago. None of it would exist if he had not ridden 2 days to find her and bring her back home. After everyone left, the house felt empty but full at the same time, empty of people, but full of memories and love. "We did good," Theresa said, echoing the sentiment from years earlier but with the weight of decades behind it now. "We did better than good. We built something real and lasting. Those 3 people out there in the world, building their own lives, they are proof that love works. That compromise and effort and choosing each other every day creates something bigger than ourselves. Do you ever regret it? Giving up your mountain cabin, your solitary life, all those things you thought you needed?" Isaac pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. "Not for a single moment. That was not living, that was existing. You taught me the difference. You gave me a reason to be brave enough to change, to risk being hurt, to build instead of hide. If I could go back and talk to the man I was when I found your note, I would tell him to ride faster, to not waste a single moment of hesitation. Because every day with you has been worth more than all those years alone combined. Even the hard days, the arguments and struggles and times we drove each other crazy, especially those days, because those are the days that proved what we had was real. Anyone can be happy together when everything is easy, but working through difficulty, adapting, growing, that is what builds something strong enough to last." They stood together in the doorway of their home, looking out at the property they had built together over 31 years. The mountains rose in the distance, constant and unchanging, a reminder of where Isaac had come from. But here, in this place between wilderness and civilization, they had forged a life that honored both their needs. Years continued to pass, marked by the ordinary joys and sorrows of aging. Health concerns emerged, a bout of pneumonia that Theresa survived but left her weaker, increasing stiffness in Isaac's joints that made physical work difficult. But they adapted, as they always had, finding new ways to fill their days and support each other. Grandchildren arrived regularly now. Thomas and Patricia had 3 children by 1915. Emma, surprisingly, married a fellow doctor in 1914 and had twins in 1916. James and Sarah had 2 children, a son and a daughter, by 1917. Isaac and Theresa made trips to visit when they could, delighting in the growing generations, but also grateful to return to the peace of their own home. The world changed dramatically during these years. The Great War erupted in Europe in 1914, eventually drawing America into the conflict in 1917. Thomas was too old and had too many children to be drafted, but they worried constantly about friends and neighbors' sons who went to fight. The war reminded Isaac powerfully of his own military service decades earlier, bringing back memories he had largely put to rest. Through it all, Isaac and Theresa remained each other's anchors. When Theresa's mother passed away in 1916, Isaac held her through her grief. When Isaac had a health scare in 1918 that turned out to be nothing serious, but terrified them both with its reminder of mortality, Theresa nursed him with tender care and refused to let him give in to dark thoughts about the future. In 1920, they celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary. The world was different than it had been in 1882. Automobiles were common now. Telephones connected people across distances. Women had won the right to vote. The Wild West of their younger days had been tamed, transformed into something more modern and settled. But their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else in their lives had been built. That anniversary evening, they sat on the porch as they had thousands of times before, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Isaac was 70 now, his body bearing the weight of decades, but his mind was still clear and his heart still full. Theresa was 65, her movements slower but her spirit undiminished. "You remember the exact spot where I caught up to you?" Isaac asked. "The place on the road where you finally stopped when I called your name?" "Of course. It was near that big bend where you can see the river. I remember everything about that day, how tired I was, how heartbroken, how terrified when I heard you coming. I did not know if you were angry or what you were going to say. I did not know either. I had 2 days to think about it, and I still had no idea what to say when I finally caught up to you. I just knew I could not let you go without trying." "What do you think would have happened if I had refused? If I had told you no, there was no hope and sent you away?" Isaac considered the question seriously. "I would have been devastated, broken, probably. But eventually I think I would have moved on. I would have had to. And you would have built some kind of life for yourself without me. We both would have survived, found some measure of contentment eventually. But neither of us would have had this life we built together, this family, this history. We would have had lesser lives, smaller lives. Good enough, perhaps, but not the best we could be. I am grateful every day that I said yes, that I gave us a chance despite my fears. Love does require bravery, does it not? The courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to build something together knowing it could all fall apart. And it does require work, so much work. I do not think young people understand that when they fall in love. They think the feelings will carry them through everything. But feelings change and fade and get tested. It is the choice to keep showing up, keep trying, keep caring even when it is hard that is what makes love last. We have made that choice well. We have indeed. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed their entire journey together. Isaac reached over and took Theresa's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. In 1923, as they approached their 60s together, a young couple moved to Salida and bought property not far from theirs. The woman came to Theresa's door one day, introducing herself as Jennifer Martin. She was young, maybe 25, and clearly struggling with isolation and loneliness on her husband's ranch. Theresa recognized something of her younger self in this woman and invited her in for coffee. Over the following months, Jennifer became a regular visitor, and Theresa shared the wisdom of her own experience. She told Jennifer about running away from Isaac's cabin, about him riding 2 days to find her, about the compromise they built together. "The key," Theresa explained, "is that both people have to be willing to change. If only one person sacrifices and adapts, resentment builds. But when both people work together to create something new that honors both their needs, that is when magic happens." Jennifer took the advice to heart, and Theresa watched with satisfaction as the young woman worked with her husband to build a life that suited them both rather than just accepting his vision for their future. "You are still teaching people, still making a difference," Isaac observed one evening after Jennifer left following another visit. "That is what we are supposed to do with the wisdom we gain through living, is it not? Pass it along to those coming behind us." Our story, our example of how to make love work through compromise and effort that is worth sharing. In the spring of 1925, Isaac's health began to decline more noticeably. He was 74 now, and the cumulative effects of age and a physically demanding life were catching up to him. He moved slower, needed help with tasks that once were simple, slept more often. Theresa, at 70, was managing better but had her own struggles with arthritis and a heart that occasionally fluttered irregularly. They talked seriously about the future, about practical matters like wills and arrangements. All three children were settled and successful, needing no financial help but deserving to inherit the property and savings their parents had accumulated. But more than the practical discussions, Isaac and Theresa talked about what their life together had meant, the legacy they were leaving. "I want our grandchildren to know the story," Isaac said. "Not just the facts, but the truth of it, how love saved both of us. How we chose each other again and again. How compromise is not weakness but strength." "They will know," Theresa promised. "I have written it all down. Every important moment, every lesson we learned, every joy and sorrow we shared. It will not be lost." In the summer of 1926, the whole family gathered for what everyone somehow knew might be the last time all together. Thomas came from California with his family. Emma arrived from Denver with her husband and children. James and Sarah brought their children from their ranch. The house and property were overflowing with people, noise, laughter, and love. Isaac, thin now and moving with difficulty, was nevertheless happy beyond measure. He sat in a chair on the porch, holding court as grandchildren climbed on him and great-grandchildren. Thomas's oldest son had married and had a baby daughter were placed carefully in his arms. Theresa moved through the chaos with a smile, though she tired easily and often had to rest. But seeing her family, seeing the ripple effects of the life she and Isaac built together, filled her with profound satisfaction. On the last evening before everyone departed, Isaac asked to speak to the whole family together. They gathered in the yard, children sitting on blankets, adults standing or in chairs, everyone focused on the patriarch of their family. "I will not make a long speech," Isaac began, his voice still strong despite his physical weakness. "I know you all have your own lives to get back to. But I wanted to say some things while you are all here together. Your grandmother and I are old now. We've lived a good long life, longer than many people get. And every bit of it has been worth living because we lived it together and because it led to all of you." He paused, gathering his thoughts. 45 years ago, your grandmother left me a note saying she could not stay in the mountains, that the isolation was killing something inside her. She told me not to follow her, and for a few hours, I considered respecting her wishes. But then I realized I could not. I could not let her go without fighting for us. So I rode for 2 days to catch up to her, and I convinced her to give us a chance at building something different, something better than what we each would have had alone. Tears were flowing down several faces now, including Theresa's. That was the most important decision of my life. Not because I was so wise or brave, but because I was too stubborn to accept losing what I had just found. And your grandmother was brave enough to say yes, to trust that we could find a way forward together. Everything good in my life came from that moment, this property, my work, my purpose, and most importantly, all of you. He looked around at the faces of his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Life is hard sometimes. Marriage is hard. Building a life with someone requires constant effort and compromise and the willingness to choose each other, even when it would be easier to give up. But it is worth it. God, it is worth it. Do not settle for half measures or half lives. Be brave enough to fight for what matters and wise enough to adapt when circumstances demand it. Isaac sat down heavily, exhausted by the speech, but satisfied he had said what needed saying. The family broke into small groups, conversations flowing, but the weight of his words lingered. That night, after everyone had gone to bed in various rooms and makeshift sleeping spaces throughout the house, Isaac and Theresa lay together in their bedroom. "That was a good thing you said tonight," Theresa told him softly. "I meant every word. I have no regrets, Theresa, not a single one. Nor do I. Whatever comes next, whatever time we have left, I am grateful for every moment we shared. Even the hard moments, especially those. They are part of the tapestry, too. The dark threads make the bright ones stand out more beautifully." They fell asleep holding hands, as they had done countless nights before. The years of 1927 and 1928 passed quietly. Isaac's health continued declining, but he remained alert and present. Theresa cared for him with the same devotion he had shown her through pregnancies and illnesses. Their children visited regularly, and the stream of grandchildren kept life interesting. In the spring of 1929, Isaac had a serious fall that left him bedridden. The doctor was honest at 78, recovering from such an injury was unlikely. Isaac would probably not walk again, and his time was limited. The family gathered once more, everyone taking turns sitting with Isaac, sharing memories, saying what needed to be said. Isaac faced his approaching death with calm acceptance. He had lived a full life, loved deeply, and left a legacy he was proud of. There was nothing left undone. In late May, with Theresa holding his hand and their children nearby, Isaac Shepard passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 78 years old and had spent 51 years loving the woman beside him. Theresa grieved deeply, but not bitterly. She had known this day was coming and had made her peace with it. At the funeral, she stood strong, accepting condolences and sharing stories of the remarkable man Isaac had been. She told everyone who would listen about the 2 days he rode to find her, how he changed the entire course of her life with his stubbornness and love. The months after Isaac's death were the hardest of Theresa's life. After 51 years of partnership, being alone felt wrong and disorienting. She stayed on the property at first, unable to imagine leaving the home they built together. But as summer turned to fall, she realized she did not need to stay. The property was just land and buildings. The home was wherever she carried Isaac's memory and the love they shared. She moved to Denver to be closer to Emma, settling into a small house near her daughter's practice. She spent her remaining years writing, painting, and being present for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She made sure all of them knew the story of their grandfather, the mountain man who loved her enough to change his entire life, and the grandmother who loved him enough to let him. Theresa lived to be 84 years old, passing away peacefully in her sleep in 1941 with Emma holding her hand. She was buried beside Isaac in the cemetery overlooking Salida, their graves side by side as their lives had been. Their story became family legend, passed down through generations. The property they built together stayed in the family, eventually becoming home to James's descendants, who still ran cattle in the Arkansas River Valley. The tale of how Isaac rode 2 days to bring Theresa back home became the standard by which all the family's love stories were measured, a reminder that real love requires courage, compromise, and the willingness to fight for what matters most. And sometimes, late in the evening when the light is just right, people swear they can see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old house, a broad-shouldered man with long hair and a silver-haired woman, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, together for eternity, just as they chose to be together in life.